Well, good evening, and thank you all very, very much for having me. But can you hear me okay? All right. Well, again, I want to thank you all very much for having me. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for all that you do. I know as volunteers and grassroots activists, I've been there before. I've been involved with the party for about 15 years. I was a county chair myself. I was a state committee member. And I know that you guys have a very thankless job. I know that you guys work your tails off. I know that you guys sometimes night and day to help get us elected and do some of the things that we get to do, and I want to thank you for that very much. As Tim was saying, I've had the opportunity over the past 6 months to serve as Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I have to tell you, it has been one of the most incredible blessings that I've ever had, and certainly something that I thank the Lord for every day. And much of it is because of the great folks that I get to serve with, and many of the big issues that we get to tackle. And I know Gary Howell is your current representative, who has done just an absolute phenomenal job this past year. He came in last year under crazy circumstances, based on what you guys have gone through in Lapeer with your previous rep. But Gary has hit the ground running. Again, he has done an incredible job, and one of the few folks in the caucus that we have that's actually chairing a very important committee with natural resources, and he is doing a great job for us. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of background about myself. I want to tell just a quick story, and I've said that I've told a few people this. Being Speaker of the House sometimes, even though it's an incredible honor, it can be very humbling sometimes. And I'll never forget, right after I was elected, it was a few days afterwards, my best friend in the House, his name is Tom Barrett. He and I had known each other for about 10, 12 years. We were at each other's wedding. And Tom was somebody that I had actually recruited to run for the House in Eaton County. And Eaton County butts up right next to Clinton County, where I represent. But the difference between Tom and I is this. In my district, it's a very safe Republican seat. It's much like Lapeer County. So it's typically a primary election. Once you get through it, more than likely it's going to be a Republican that's going to represent you. In Eaton County, it's very 50-50. So every cycle, we have to spend about $1 million telling the whole world how great Tom Barrett is to ensure that he gets reelected. Well, because the two counties touch, Tom is actually my media market. So when we would run all those ads, I think it's been about $2.5 million over the past 4 years, those ads would actually run in my district. So a few days after I was elected Speaker, Tom and I were sitting down at a local diner a few blocks away from where Janelle, my wife, and I were to live. And we're sitting down, and this lady walks in, and she looks across the restaurant. She looks right at Tom Barrett, and she is so excited. She goes, "Tom, you are the best thing ever. I am so glad you won. I am so excited. We were rooting for you." She said, "Unfortunately, we couldn't vote for you because we don't live in your district, but you are awesome, and we're glad you won." The restaurant owner walks up, he puts his arm around her, he goes, "Man," he says, "that other Tom that he's having lunch with," he said, "he is your representative. He just got elected Speaker of the House." And she looks at me and she goes, "I have no idea who the heck that is." And that was my introduction to becoming Speaker of the House. But again, just a brief background about me. I was a prosecutor for 3 years in Genesee County, just west of here. In the city of Flint, handled anything from a traffic ticket to a homicide, anything in between. In my last year and a half there, I was assigned to our Special Crimes Division, where we did anything that was high profile in the media, high profile murders, gang activity. But I was one of the two that actually handled all the major drug dealers in the city of Flint. That's what I did while I was there. Then went on to work in the Attorney General's office. Was subsequently approached by my local senator and my sheriff to run for the House, and here I am. Now, I will tell you, before I get into a few of the issues that we have tackled over the past 6 months, I will tell you, becoming Speaker is actually, or obtaining the title Speaker, if you will, has probably been the second best title I have actually had the opportunity to take on over the past year. And the number one title I've been able to take on is that of Dad. Janelle and I, and many of you may have heard this story, and if you follow me on Facebook, it's something that we do not shy away from. But we were told about 4 years ago that we would never have the ability or the opportunity to have children. It was just simply not going to be in our cards. And the two of us, we had begun the adoption process, and we were actually going to adopt a young baby from China. We were actually going to go over there over this past March. In about 3 weeks before we were going to make a very substantial payment towards that adoption, and just a few weeks after I had made the decision, or we had made the decision collectively that I was going to run for speaker, we found out Janelle was pregnant. And I tell folks all the time, the good Lord has a very neat sense of humor, because we had tried all that time. We weren't successful, and probably that the one moment where I would have said, Lord, let's just take a time out, not do it right now, it's going to get really busy. That's when we found out Janelle was pregnant. But if you've been watching or following us on Facebook, you'll see our little baby is Hannah. We named her after Hannah in the Bible. And a neat story about her, and I know we've got Gary Glenn here tonight. Gary, around the time that we found out that Janelle was pregnant, Gary found out that he had, he'll probably tell you a little bit more about this later, but found out that he had stage 4 cancer. And the prognosis did not look very good. And when I found out what Gary was going through, I remember we were sitting there on the house floor, and I said, Gary, I said, and I told him our story. And I said, I have no doubt that you are going to beat this cancer. I said, and when you beat it, Janelle has our baby. I said, we're going to take a miracle photo on the House of Representatives. We're going to bring the baby onto the floor. You're going to hold her or him. We didn't know what we were having at the time. I said, you're going to hold the baby. I said, and we're going to take a photo of 2 miracles. One person that's beat cancer, and this miracle baby that was never supposed to be born. And I'm proud to say in December, Gary and I actually got to take that photo. He beat this cancer when the doctors didn't think he was going to, and Janelle and I had that baby. So. But looking back and reflecting on the past 6 months legislatively, I will tell you, again, it has been an honor to serve in this capacity with these 62 other members. And I remember when I first came in, I had several folks in Lansing, they approached me as if what they were saying was bad news, or God's going to take it as something negative. They came and they said, hey, you know, you got to understand, they said, you are going to be Speaker of the House for arguably the most conservative House that's ever served in the history of the state. And I said, well, I think that's a really good thing. And if you look at some of the things that we have been able to accomplish over the past 6 months, when I became Speaker, the first thing that we did was we actually posted the salaries of every single employee and legislator online for the world to see. We believe that the best government is transparent government. We want to be open with you guys. Those tax dollars that we spend, they're not ours. They are yours, and we feel that you ought to know what we are doing with the dollars that you send us in Lansing. So we ensured that every single staffer's salary is online for the world to see. A few weeks later, we passed FOIA reform to open up the legislature and the executive branch to FOIA. Again, open government or transparent government being the best government we believe that one can have. You then probably read we have been taking the lead, and we have been pushing very hard on income tax relief. If you remember a few years ago, the income tax was raised from 3.9 to 4.35. It was supposed to sunset, and it was one of those promises that the income tax was going to go back down to 3.9. And you know, it's very interesting with government. It seems like when they lower the taxes, if it's promised that it's going to go back up, government has no promise doing that. But when it's supposed to go back down, they really struggle to get it to go back down. And we came out of the gate fighting for income tax relief. Now, I will tell you this, unfortunately, we had 12 members in our caucus that voted no on the legislation, and unfortunately, it did fail by 3 votes. All that to say, we tabled it for the night, and we have not given up on this. We are going to continue to fight. Now, what I didn't know after we had pushed for this income tax relief, and I've had several folks have asked me, they said, what has been one of the most surprising or shocking things that you have found being Speaker of the House? And I said, probably the most shocking thing that I have seen is how difficult it is sometimes to get Republicans to want to cut taxes. When we introduced this bill, I thought this thing would just sail right through. We were on the floor for about 12, 13 hours. Now, I will tell you this. Your representative, Gary Howell, was with us the whole time, so he was not in that dozen that was giving us any trouble at all. He was with us, but we got to the wee hours of the night and realized that we were going to be a couple votes short. And I found out it was the first time since 2001. And I didn't know this at the time. It was the first time since 2001 that a Speaker of the House, Republican or Democrat, actually put a bill up knowing that it was going to fail. And saw a failed vote go up. And I remember that night when we got to the point where we realized we didn't have the votes and I decided we were going to actually put it up. I brought in my press secretary and I said, Gideon, I said, I want you to paint the Armageddon scenario. I said, you know, I've talked to the leadership team, I've consulted with them. We've gone through all of these members' websites, most all of them campaigned on lowering taxes, wanting to fight for lower taxes, and we feel everybody needs to be accountable to the people that they represent and the people they campaigned to over the past 2 years. I said, I want you to paint the Armageddon scenario right now. What happens if I, as Speaker, if I put a vote up and it fails? What happens? And he said, well, the folks in Lansing are probably going to think you guys are crazy. I said, okay. He said, the media is probably going to beat you up for about a week. I said, okay. He said, the free press on Sunday is probably going to write a very nasty editorial about you. I said, okay. And he said, but I will tell you what. He said, the activists, the grassroots, the delegates, the folks that busted their tails, the folks that believed in you, the folks that hit doors, the folks that made those calls, the folks that walked in parades, the folks that passed out literature, he said they're going to be happy that a caucus is finally stepping up and fighting for it. And I said, this is a no-brainer. Let's go out there right now. And that's why we did what we did that night, was to, again, hold ourselves accountable to all of you whom we have campaigned to in terms of less government, lower taxes, and to show you and to demonstrate to you that we were fighting for you guys that night. So again, we have been on the front lines of fighting for lower taxes, constitutional carry. That is a big one. And we were able to get that accomplished a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago. I could not believe it when the media asked. We started working with this on this constitutional carry. The media walked up, or one of the reporters walked up, and he asked me. He said, "What do you think about the constitutional carry bill that just got introduced?" And I said, "Well, I think it's 228 years past due." And I didn't know that me saying that was going to become a media story. And then immediately, the Detroit News actually wrote an article the following day. House Speaker backs controversial legislation, constitutional carry. Now, when in the world did we get to a place where it became controversial to actually fight for your right to keep and bear arms? I don't know how in the world we got there. But all that to say, this House Republican caucus is going to continue to fight for conservative values that we all hold dear and that you all want to see us fight for. Now, when you look at 2018 and what we have coming up, conventional wisdom would tell you. Now, we don't know what's going to happen over the next year and a half. No, but conventional wisdom would tell you. Look back in history. Typically, a party that holds the governor's office for 2 straight terms, typically they don't go well in the following election. And as you know, Republicans have had the governor's office over the past 2 terms. Secondly, typically when a party has the White House or they hold the presidency, the first midterm elections don't go real well. So conventional wisdom would tell you that we've got both of those working against us right now. But all that to say, when you look at this Democrat Party, they are absolutely broken. And I don't believe they stand for anything. And I would say that in a room full of Democrats right now, if they were here. You look at, they just faced, I don't know if you saw this in the media, they just faced the most substantial fine in the history of any political organization of our country. They would just fined $500,000 because they were holding these illegal bingo fundraisers over the course of about 10 or 12 years. They have a national committee chairperson who has, and I am so proud that our national committee, or our national chairwoman, Romney McDaniel, who used to be the chairwoman of our state, held him accountable and called him out this Sunday on Meet the press, I don't know if you saw this, but this is a chairman that is going around the country who claims he wants to be bipartisan, who claims he wants more civility, who has absolutely no plan for his party. His party has no plan. In fact, he's just going around saying, Republicans don't give a blank about you. That's all they got, because they're broken. I don't know if you saw this candidate that they had that was running for mayor in either Lincoln or Omaha, Nebraska. A Democrat running for mayor, and God forbid he took the stance that he was going to be pro-life. They essentially ostracized this guy, pulled the rug out from under him, and basically told him, we will have nothing to do with you because you're pro-life. And this is the party that claims to be Big Tent, all-inclusive. Again, they are broken, and they stand for nothing. Okay, so we know they're broken. However, if we are going to be successful in 2018, I believe we need to do two things. Aside from working hard, aside from staying energized, one is we need to continue as a party, and our legislature needs to continue to tackle big issues. We've not been afraid to do that in the past, and we need to continue to do that going forward. So I'm going to throw a couple out there tonight that going into the fall, some issues that I personally as speaker, I would like to tackle. And some of these are issues that Republicans don't typically talk about, but when I bring them up, I see a lot of heads going like that. And I believe they can be winning issues for our party. Okay, so above and beyond the great conservative bills that we have passed, these three, one, mental health reform. As Tim was saying, I had the opportunity to work for the probate judge in Genesee County, Jenny Barkey. And you may or may not have heard that name. But Jenny Barkey actually started the pilot program for mental health courts here in the state of Michigan. And I'll be the first to tell you, when I was working for her at the time when she started these, I thought they were going to be a colossal failure. I never thought they would work. I remember I went back into her chambers, this is back in 2007, and I told her they would. And I'm proud to say I recently talked to her, and this mental health court that she started the pilot for, and now they've expanded across the state, has a 90% success rate, with over 90 people in the program. These are people that are now looking for jobs, they're finishing their GEDs, finishing their diplomas, but most importantly, they're folks that are on their medication. And what I have found, or what I found through that mental health court is this: when folks suffer from mental illness, they are much different people when they're on their medication versus when they are off. And when you look at our prison population, you look at the cost of our prisons, right now we spend over $2 billion per year on corrections. But what a lot of people don't know is this: about 25% of our prison population suffers from some type of mental illness. And when they do, the average cost of that inmate goes from $38,000 a year to $110,000. I have to believe many of those 15,000 inmates that are in prison right now that suffer from mental illness probably would not have committed the heinous crime that they committed had they been on their medication, had they been receiving the help and treatment that they needed at that time. So this is an issue I think Republicans can do very well with. And kind of keep this here if you can, but I'll tell you this: we are just now finalizing. I've had the staff working on this for the past several months. We are actually going to introduce over the next few days a task force. And we are actually going to see what we can do as Republicans to tackle this mental health issue. Secondly, another big issue, and I know this has got to be an issue here in Lapeer County as well, is skilled trades. I don't know how in the world we got so far off in terms of essentially telling all of our young men and women or our children that if you don't go to a four-year institution, if you don't go to a four-year institute, or if you don't go to a college, you can't be successful. And right now, we have thousands of jobs, of job openings. We have shortages all across the state. Good jobs. 10 more? And then questions, right?
Yes.
Yep. Pipe fitters, plumbers, welders, construction workers, you name it. And we are not filling those jobs because we have gone so far essentially telling our children, if you don't go to a four-year college, you can't be successful. And I'll never forget the story I was told by a gentleman by the name of Jim Byron. He's the president of the Michigan Agribusiness Association. One of his members had a job posting, or two job postings, excuse me. One was for a computer programmer, required a 4-year degree, who was going to pay $30,000 to $35,000 a year. Came with full health benefits, and they had nearly 100 people apply for the position. The same person had a job opening for a welder, who was going to pay more than double, and they had 2 people apply for the position. And if we are not doing the job of training our young men and women so that they can fill $70,000 to $80,000 a year jobs, I say shame on us. And this is something that we have got to improve on. And the last issue, and there are many more that we're going to tackle, this is another big issue that I hear from all across the state, is addressing the increasing costs or the high costs of auto insurance rates. This is a huge deal, and it is absolutely burying people right now. Now, a lot of folks think that the reason that their insurance rates are so high is because these insurance companies are just out there gouging them on their rates. I wish I could tell you it was that simple, and that is what was going on, but that's not the case. What happened was when we put the auto no-fault system in place nearly 40 years ago, it was actually working as intended. It was streamlining the court process. It was actually keeping costs low. It was ensuring that the trial attorneys weren't out padding their pockets. It was stopping and preventing litigation. But what happened was, when the legislation was written under auto no-fault law, it said that health providers, and this is mainly the hospitals, are entitled to reasonable charges. About 15, 20 years ago, the court interpreted that to mean, essentially, if you're injured in an auto accident and a health provider sends a bill, doesn't matter how high it is, your auto insurance company's got to pay it. And they really don't have the ability to negotiate. So I'll give you an example of 2 different individuals. Let's take somebody that was injured, let's say a football injury, and the other one's injured in an auto accident. And they messed their shoulder up. The person that's injured over here has Blue Cross Blue Shield, the other one over here, their auto insurance is paying. This person goes into the hospital, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to take an x-ray. It's probably going to cost $75. Over here, that x-ray is going to cost $400. Then they're going to do an MRI, and over here it's going to cost $700 to $800. Over here it's going to cost anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000. Then they're going to do a shoulder operation. Over here it's going to cost $1,800. Over here it's going to cost $8,000. And that's why your auto insurance rates are so high right now. And this is an issue that we need to tackle. We need to work on this, and we need to get some type of cost containment within this system. Has anybody noticed, if you've been to a doctor or a hospital lately, have you noticed that the first checkbox when you walk in, or the first question they ask is, were you injured in an auto accident? And the reason they ask that question is they know that the cost of what they're going to get reimbursed is going to be 4, 5, 6 times higher than if you have a commercial health insurance company that's paying. Last, I'll say this. Not only do we have to tackle big issues if we're going to be successful, but we need to make certain that as Republicans, we stand firm on our core principles and those values that got us here. And we cannot sway from those. So we have got to be the party that's going to continue to fight for lower taxes. We've got to continue to remain the party that is going to push, promote, and pass legislation that is going to protect your rights to keep and bear arms. And most importantly, we need to maintain, or we need to remain the party that is going to fight to preserve and protect life from the time of conception to that of natural death. And I have no doubt that if we continue to tackle big issues, if we continue to stick with our party principles and our core values that got us here, and we continue to stick together and we continue to work hard, we will be successful on 18. So with that, I will entertain any questions anybody might have.
Give him a hand, please. We're going to let you have questions and answers for about 20 seconds here. 20 minutes.
I thought it was going to be easy.
It would only be
All right.
20 seconds. At any rate, so we're going to start that right now. Please make your questions reasonable, okay? And also, I want you to talk into the microphone because we record this, as you know, so it goes streaming. And they want to be able to hear you talking. So, anybody got any questions for Mr. Leonard right now? Raise your hand.
Hi, I would just like to know one of your core values is taxing my pension.
I'm so sorry.
I'd like to know if one of your core values is taxing my pension. When I retired 2 years ago, I enjoyed the new law of Mr. Snyder's taxing my pension. What do you feel about that?
Yes. I will tell you, I know that there has been legislation that has been introduced that would repeal the pension tax or the pension tax exemption, if you will. For me personally, I would like to see us, if we're going to tackle tax relief, I would prefer to see us tackle broad-based relief. I know if we were to repeal the pension tax, it would cost us somewhere in the ballpark, of about $1 billion a year, and that is about the same that it would cost if we were to lower the income tax from 4.25% to 3.9%. So, for me personally, if we're going to tackle tax relief, I'd like to see it apply broad-based to everybody across the state.
Fair enough.
Will you speak a little bit about part-time legislation?
Oh, the legislature, okay, yes, so I am one, I support the idea and the concept of a part-time legislature. I will be frank, in terms of the particular proposal that's going through, and now it's dead, I know the lieutenant governor is going to resubmit language. There's not new language submitted, so I can't take a stance on whatever it is he is getting ready to reintroduce because there's nothing there yet. But in terms of in concept, and I've been very clear about this, I do support the idea and the concept of a part-time legislature. I feel anytime you've got fewer regulations, anytime you've got fewer laws, I think that is a good thing for the people of the state.
What are your thoughts on term limits then, when it comes to the part-time legislature?
So I think, Chris, I think the two, and I know folks have tried to tie these two issues, if you will. I think each one ought to be a standalone issue, okay? Now, I'm probably one of the few, and maybe I'm in the majority in this room, I don't know. I'm probably one of the few that actually does support term limits, okay? But all that to say, and let me explain this, I do believe they could be modified. And by modified, I don't mean give us more years to serve, but what I have found happens is this. Right now, under the current term limits, we can serve 6 years in the House and we can serve 8 years in the Senate, okay? And what I found happens is a lot of times is there's members that will serve only 2 years in the House, and then if a Senate seat opens, they'll run for that Senate seat. And I will tell you, I have spoken to maybe 5 or 6 current serving senators that I served with in the House, and I asked them point blank, I said, do you enjoy it more over here, meaning in the Senate, or did you enjoy it more in the House? And they said, it's not even up for debate or discussion. They said the House was much better. I would rather stay in the House. I think if you could modify them, and I'd even be willing to go so far as saying instead of us being able to serve 14 years total, we would just serve 12 years total. So I'd even reduce the amount of time that we could serve to 12 years. But I believe if you could modify it to say, okay, all you're going to get is 12 years. You can do 6 terms in the House, you can do 3 4-year terms in the Senate, or you can do a combination, but you can't serve any more than 12 years. I think what you would cut down, I think one, you'd have a lot more experienced people around because you wouldn't have folks running for other positions. But secondly, again, you would have people that want to get to one branch and stay there, get to know it, get to understand it, and be as effective as they can. So I don't know if that's clear as mud with the answer that I gave you, but again, and I support term limits. Could they be modified? Absolutely, and that's something that I would certainly look at, even if it meant reducing the amount of time that we could actually serve.
Thank you. What about the insurance where you can buy insurance from other states? I thought that was in the plan to get reduction in car insurance and home home insurance. You were,
I don't know, I know that was a big issue in terms of for health insurance. And
Right,
that's
it
more
was
of a,
for
that's
the-
more of a federal issue. One thing I will say in terms of out-of-state insurance companies, because Michigan, that's another issue, and I'm telling you, I learned more about auto no-fault insurance and auto no-fault reform than I ever thought I would when I chaired the insurance committee. But one thing I have found is that Michigan has, my understanding is that Michigan has much less competition than other states, and less companies actually bidding to do auto insurance. Because what happens is, out-of-state companies, because we have an unlimited lifetime benefit, and those auto insurance companies are on the hook for that, what happens is that they insure one person that happens to have a catastrophic injury, and they're responsible for that person for the rest of their lives. That company is essentially responsible for this big, being part of this big fund. It's called the MCCA. And what's happening is many out-of-state companies are saying, we're not going to compete in Michigan. We're not going to sell insurance in Michigan because it's not worth it for us to be stuck on the hook if we have somebody that's catastrophically injured and we're stuck paying on this fund in the event that it goes belly up. So I will tell you, we have had a very difficult time actually getting out-of-state insurance companies to want to come in and actually bid and sell insurance simply because of the way that our no-fault system is structured.
yeah. Now, what you just said, I heard that they were going to try and come in with cheaper rates, whether that's true or not, I don't know.
I've not heard that. I mean, all I've seen with auto
Okay.
insurance is that it's continuing to rise and
Yeah.
rise and rise.
Okay.
Well, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way to control the hospital's charges? Because I'm a nurse, I've seen that, and I've done home care and taken care of one of those catastrophic people, a couple of them. And, I mean, my goodness, one of the guys is driving a Mercedes van.
Yeah, it's.
I'm lucky to drive my 2,000 per mile. But my friend's daughter had a baby, twins, and they charge like $20 for a package of pads. Hello, you can go buy a whole box full of them for that much.
We have, and yeah, to answer your question, the simple answer is yes. Is there something we can do? Absolutely. And let me go just a step further, okay? We have seen instances whereby when somebody's injured in an auto accident, it could be something as simple as they just, they cut their head, they go in, they get stitches, and the hospital has to pop open a little bottle of Neosporin or ointment, $8 bottle, and hospitals are charging auto insurance companies $110 for that thing. Now, when we were pushing reform, so the answer to your question is yes. Can we do it legally? Absolutely. It's going to have to be done through legislation. Cost control, meaning some type of fee schedule. So either giving auto insurance companies, the ability to negotiate rates or putting a fee schedule in. It was funny, when you watch the hospitals, the way they moved the ball on this issue, when this was moving through last term, what happened was we were going to essentially give the auto insurance companies the ability to negotiate rates, okay? And if for some reason there was litigation and they went to court and they couldn't negotiate a rate, what would happen is the fallback would be what the average commercial health insurance company paid that hospital, okay? That sounded very fair, it was great legislation, okay? The kickback we kept getting from the hospitals, and I disagreed with them, but the kickback we kept getting was this is terrible because we're gonna lose so much money on litigation, we're not gonna be able to do this, okay? So in the committee, I set them up on this. Essentially what I did is, we actually offered a fee schedule and said, okay, you don't want litigation, we will put a fee schedule on the books, 150% Medicare, okay? Now, I didn't just draw that out of the sky or grab that from out of the sky. I intentionally chose that because of this. 150% Medicare is about 25% higher than what a commercial health insurer actually pays. So the litigation argument was taken off the table. We're not getting as much as the commercial health insurance companies was taken off the table. We know it's higher than Medicare. We know it's higher than Medicaid. It was higher than workers' comp. So when the hospital lobbyist came in, he used this term. I'll never forget it. You could pull it up online. He said, "This fee schedule is unworkable. It is grossly inadequate." And he said, and with this type of fee schedule, we cannot provide adequate medical attention. So I said, okay, So I asked, I said, so would you agree that this fee schedule is a third higher than what Medicare reimburses? He said, yep. I said, would you agree it's 2 to 3 times higher than what Medicaid would reimburse? He said, yep. I said, would you agree that it's, I don't know, 18, 20% higher than work comp? Yep. Would you agree that it's 25% higher than any commercial health insurance company would pay? He said, yep. I said, so what you're saying is the only, if a person in the state of Michigan comes to your hospital, the only way they can get adequate medical attention is if they are injured in an auto accident. And it was just crickets. He had no response to that. So these guys would just continue to move the bill, but again, they have made so much money off this, they are gonna continue to fight it tooth and nail.
Well, how do you
She's the
stop-
boss, I'm going with her.
How do you stop the hospital monopolies? Like
Yeah.
McLaren is taking over everything. I was up in the UP and they're like, I was at this hospital and they changed the name, it's McLaren. Who in the world is McLaren? And I'm like, yeah, don't discuss that, I worked there.
You know, I think,
Back in 2000, when I hired back in there, that CEO was making 6 figures. Believe me, he wasn't worth 6 figures. And I'm sure the one that left just shortly was making a whole lot more, and he definitely wasn't worth it.
yeah, a lot of this consolidation and a lot of this, less competition, a lot of these health systems buying up hospitals and going into one big health system, I don't think that's due to auto insurance. Most of that is due to Obamacare. With a lot of these mandates on these electronic filings and things that doctors have to punch in, I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are doctors, and they have flat out said they can no longer do primary practice. They can no longer work on them, for themselves, because there's so much regulation under Obamacare. It simply it doesn't pay for them to do this, so they've got to hire into a health system, and these health systems continue to grow and buy these hospitals. So to answer your question, I believe most of that is due to Obamacare. That particular issue probably doesn't have a lot to do with actual auto insurance.
This lady.
My understanding is that the catastrophic fund is so large that the chances of it going belly up are pretty remote. That's a comment, and you can comment on that too, but my question is, so where does it stand now? Because this car insurance business is ridiculous.
This is something we are continuing to work on. I'm not gonna give you false hope, but I tell people all the time, I think this is the hardest issue in Lansing to work on for 2 reasons, okay? One, the provider network or the hospital lobby is very powerful, but second, and you have to understand this as well, particularly when you look at Oakland County and you look at Kent County. They've got Beaumont Health System and they've got Spectrum Health System. Those are the 2 largest employers in those areas. And to get legislators, it's tough to get a legislator to say, I'm gonna vote for reform that my largest employer is adamantly opposed to, it's very difficult. Now, in terms of this catastrophic claims fund, I believe what they've done is they've used this catastrophic claims fund basically as like a red herring to distract folks. So what happens under the auto no-fault system? If you are injured in an auto accident, if your medical fees are less than $540,000, okay, your auto insurance company actually, they're responsible for the first $540,000, okay? If you've noticed, if you've received your bill recently, and it's probably around $160 to $170, there's a fee, it's called the MCCA. That fee goes into this fund to pay for those whose injuries, essentially they're catastrophically injured. These are people whose injuries exceed $540,000, okay? So at that point, what happens is, once you go over that $540,000 limit, your insurance company continues to pay the bills, but then they get reimbursed from this fund. So essentially, after you hit the $540,000, your auto insurance company is no longer paying, they're getting reimbursed from this fund. The fund is funded by that $160 or $170. Now, what I'll say is this, we get a lot of folks that say, well, what about this fund? Let's talk about the fund. Okay, well, even if we completely address the fund, and I'm not gonna say that there's no fraud in this fund at all, okay? But what I will say is this, if people are paying, and I've talked to people that are paying anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000 per premium for their auto insurance. If they're paying that amount of money for their auto insurance, if this fund is $160 or $170, even if we totally fix the fund and the fee for that fund was completely eliminated, if somebody's auto insurance rates go from $4,000 to $3,820, have we really done anything for them? So the cost savings, even though we can do some things to address that fund and help with the fund, the cost savings is not with that. The cost savings is in that first $540,000 where the hospitals are really gouging on the system.
What are your opinions on the uninsured motorists, but portion of your car insurance? Because I had an incident 3 years ago, and I was headed on Southfield Freeway, rear-ended, and my little Dale ended up on the median. But anyway, my insurance company took care of everything, and I was back to work in 2 months.
Well, and that's why we have the no-fault system. I mean,
Right.
that's essentially what it's supposed to do. You know, folks want to really address this uninsured motorist issue. And we had one legislator that essentially wanted to throw uninsured motorists in jail and impound their cars and not let them get them back. At first blush, that might sound right, but think about it this way. How many people think the individual mandate under Obamacare, where the federal government is forcing you to purchase a product, who thinks it's okay that the government is doing that? I don't see anybody. Okay, we are doing the same thing in the state of Michigan with auto insurance. We are telling you, every person in here, the only way you can get a job, the only way you can go anywhere, the only way you can legally drive a vehicle is if you purchase not only auto insurance, but you have to purchase auto insurance that is unlimited in nature. You have no choice. And by the way, once you purchase it, there is absolutely no cost control that is going to allow those rates to go down. And quite frankly, I think for us to force folks to purchase a product that is costing anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per year, to say that's the only way you can keep a job and it's the only way you can drive a vehicle, I believe that that's criminal. In terms of what we have done to them.
I pay $400 every 6 months for coverage on my vehicle. I'm sure the person hit me, rammed me, and asked, put it on the median. My auto insurance company took care of my wages, took care of the hospital costs, and like I said, I was back to work in 2 months. I thought it was pretty good. But I paid for that. I paid for that coverage. Right. But I'm fine with that coverage. As anybody else would have been rear-ended and torn in the median.
Okay, folks, we got time for about 2 or 3 more questions for Tom. And then you'll be around afterwards too, so if you have some questions or something.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
Well, it wasn't actually my original question, but it was the catastrophic fund. When you put it in terms of, well, it's only $160-some. For example, I've got a work vehicle I have my personal vehicle. I have 6 vehicles. July 1st, it went up $60. 6 times 165 would be a substantial thing to me. And to have you sit there and say, well, it's only a little bit, is it really worth giving you your money back? That's a little insulting, first off. Second off, according to Mr. Lucido, Representative Lucido, when he looked at it a couple of years ago, we have around $20 billion in that fund. The most it's ever gone up per year is 900, or the most it's ever been drawn out, to the best understanding as of Representative Lucido's office, unless he's mistaken, was around 900 million. So if this thing keeps going, I mean, it's staggering numbers, it's going up. I mean, I appreciate that we have to prepare for things, but that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
And
well,
we could be using that on other things.
Yeah, and let me clarify this. I'm not saying it's only $170 and, you know, that's cheap, but my point is, what I'm saying is I have met people, again, that are paying anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 per year on their auto insurance. So my question is, or what I'm saying is, I guess rhetorically is, if we are really going to have cost savings, if we're gonna focus our efforts on something, Are we gonna focus our efforts on that $3,000 to $5,000 per year, or are we gonna focus our efforts on the $170 per year? There's no doubt that we can do some changes and we can do some things to lower costs on the 170, but if you're gonna look at a 30% reduction on one of the two, you're gonna want the 30% reduction more on the first one versus the second one, where the true savings are gonna be.
Okay, well, and that's, and I can respect that, like I said, again, I'm in that range, and, you know, $1,200, $1,400, $1,500 is strictly just in those fees, which again, went up $60 for me, and every other driver that's got a car, $10 on July 1st. So I just think, you know, we've got that. I've heard other legislators say, well, we can't do that, that's the only, you know, legislature can't do it. The legislators will put that in place. So I, you know, to have, you know, and others, not yourself, but others have said, well, really can't touch that. The legislatures will put that in place initially. So yes, it can be, but my main question is on Common Core. Where is your standing on that? You know, you know, there's been some stuff on there, and I know it's, Bill's been kind of sitting in committee for a while. What do we have to do to get that done? Is it time to replace some legislators, those that are, because I gotta tell you, frankly, myself and others are a little upset that this in action, you got some good folks that have come in here with some good ideas, and you got some others that are kind of sitting on their hands.
Yeah, what I would say is keep contacting, so first, let me go back to myself. I have been adamantly, vehemently, whatever you want to call it, opposed to Common Core since I found out what it was. I was one of probably a dozen legislators my first term, and I know I was one of 2 members that was on our 12-person leadership team that actually voted no on the resolution that was going to fund Common Core. So I have been adamantly opposed to Common Core since the day I got to the legislature and I learned what Common Core is, or learned what Common Core was. All that to say, we introduced, I know Rep. Glenn introduced legislation to repeal and replace Common Core, and right now, he, as well as Rep. Chatfield, are continuing to work on this legislation. My understanding is that the bill is a couple votes short in terms of being able to get out of committee. And until we can muster or get those couple votes that we need to get it out of committee, it's going to be there. So what I would say is as an activist, continue to contact those members on the committee, continue to work them, continue to email them, let them know where you're at, go to Lansing, visit them. I hope that answers your question. I mean, I know, you know, the problem is right now, I know a vast majority of the caucus is opposed to Common Core, but again, right now I believe we're a couple votes short on the committee, and even if it got to the floor, we'd probably be a few votes short getting it passed. So we need you guys as activists to continue to reach out, contact legislators, and push them on this particular issue.
Just real quick, what are the majorities that the Republicans hold in the legislature, in the Senate, and in the House?
27 to 11 in the Senate and 63 to 47 in the or 27 to 11 in the Senate, 63 to 47.
Kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, and again, myself, I oppose it. I'm with you. I would love to see this legislation get passed.
Appreciate it.
Okay, one more question, finally.
Yeah, I wanted to address again that issue of the automobile insurance coverage. My wife and I own 4 vehicles. I don't drive 4 vehicles at one time. I like to put 2 vehicles in season, in storage, and so forth. My suggestion to you is to look at the insurance coverage as a family package with a universal license plate so that you can use it for appropriate vehicles for specific purposes. For example, horse trailering might be one issue. Normal transportation for work is another issue, and just specific vehicle uses. But we're being penalized by having 4 vehicles. We have to have them licensed. We have to have them insured. I think it should be a family insurance or a family package for vehicles that you can put in storage and so forth to save cost. It's an issue I've addressed with Gary Howell. He's heard me talk about that. Okay.
I'm just following your lead.
Okay, one more question, and then Carl first. You people have talked at least once, so I'm going to give everybody a shot. Carl.
First of all, thank you for coming. And I think you forgot to mention pension reform, which I believe at this point has been passed into law for the teachers. And I don't think we could overstate the importance of that reform for the future financial well-being of our state. So I want to applaud you and everybody else who worked to pass that. In response to an earlier question about taxes, you stated that you were for broad-based tax reduction. And I was really glad to hear that. During the lost decade of the failed Grant Home administration, the legislature liked to pick winners and losers, take general tax money from everybody and give it to a few well-connected, politically powerful companies. When Snyder was elected, that was mostly curtailed, not completely. And unfortunately, in the last legislature, now in this one, we're going back to those failed policies. There has been legislation passed to give brownfield development money to millionaires and billionaires. And now tomorrow, you're scheduled to vote for the so-called Good Jobs for Michigan, where again, you're going to essentially take money from everybody to give to the select few. And so I'm really hoping, and hopefully you can speak to this, that you're opposed to that, and that you will not allow that to come up for a vote, especially if you abide by the Hastert rule and the majority of your caucus is opposed to it.
Yep. So what I can tell you is two things, okay? One, I can tell you, and I've already made clear to the caucus, I made clear in the media, I agree with you on this particular legislation. I believe this is the wrong direction to go, and if this goes up for a vote tomorrow as speaker, I will be voting no on the legislation, okay? All that to say, we are going to caucus on this issue tomorrow, and we will see which direction the caucus wants to head. If a majority of our caucus says this is an issue that we believe is best for our district, and the votes are there, and they want to put it up, then the bill will go up, and I will be voting no, and the caucus knows that. But all that to say, two things. One, when it goes up tomorrow, barring some unforeseen amendment that I'm not expecting, which I don't think is going to happen, I fully intend, and my caucus knows, and the governor knows, that when this goes up, if it goes up tomorrow, I will be voting no. But secondly, I have made very clear to the governor, he will not get a vote on this legislation. The interest groups will not get a vote on this legislation if less than a majority of my caucus or our caucus supports it. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Next slide, Bill, we're down to legislators. Next, back up one. Okay, we have several legislator people here. We want to hear from all of them. So we'd like to, at this time in our meetings, as usual, we give about 5 or 10 minutes for them to speak on any information they have or updates on the positions in House. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with this. So, anyways, and also because of time, we're limited to how many questions. So each one of them, if you have a question for them, we're going to ask just one or two different people. First up,
You want to use the other mic.
Take the other mic.
The other mic, yeah, no.
okay. And shut it off, might as well talk.
There we go.
Okay, so the first one we're going to hear from is our House of Representative from the 82nd District, Gary Howell. Please welcome Gary up here.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as always. First, I want to say what a great honor it is to represent the people of Lapeer County and how much I deeply appreciated the support of this particular group in the last elections. I really value my conservative friends, and I do my level best to carry that conservative banner in Lansing. As Speaker Leonard mentioned, we probably have the most conservative caucus we've had in quite a long time, and I deeply appreciate his leadership because he's done a heck of a job to bring conservative issues and hold tight against others in Lansing of either party take a conservative position. I'm going to talk about 3 issues quickly that are currently pending. One is the one that Carl referred to, revolving around taxes. I will be voting no on the so-called good jobs bill tomorrow if it comes to a vote. I voted against the one called Thrive a few months ago. You know, they have awfully nice feel-good names for these things. We're going to thrive, and to thrive, it's going to cost the taxpayers $1 billion. We're going to have good jobs, it's going to cost the taxpayers $200 million. All these feel-good names comes down to simply this. We have neglected to roll back the taxes as the legislature promised years ago to the 3.9% rate. We have done nothing to ameliorate the pension tax that was raised on folks, the child deduction that was taken away from our young families, the earned income tax credit that was dramatically reduced for our working families. All those sacrifices were made in past years on the argument that we're going to reduce corporate taxes down to 6%. Is this thing is a pain in the ass? I'm going to speak loudly instead. We've done all these things. We have neglected the individual taxpayer, and now they come back to us and say, let's take that money from the individual taxpayer and give it to whomever our friends might be. I think that is fundamentally wrong. I'm going to vote no. I will continue to vote no. I've informed the governor's representatives I'm voting no. I just don't think it is right for the taxpayers of Michigan. Now, to go to a couple pieces of legislation that I have personally been working on. First is a bill having to do with our Second Amendment rights. House Bill 4616, which I have sponsored. It has come before the local government committee, which I serve on. It has been reported out. My bill is a so-called preemption bill. What it would say simply is municipalities in Michigan who are violating the law, because we already have a law in Michigan that says a local unit of government cannot infringe on your gun rights as long as they are protected by state law. This was adopted 27 years ago. By the way, it was passed by a Democratic House of Representatives, signed by a Democrat governor. So the Democrats should not be complaining, although they are unanimously, well, with one exception. So my bill is, say, look, 27 years is long enough for the Ann Arbors of the world to recognize that we have constitutional rights to bear arms. So what my bill says, if you local municipal officials go ahead and defy state law and adopt these illegal ordinances, then the citizens may sue you individually. And they may sue the municipality to overturn the illegal ordinance and hold that official liable who has no respect for our Second Amendment rights. And I would point out that it's not just the Second Amendment. As we all know, that is the federal amendment that protects our right to bear arms. It does have a phrase in there which excites lots of discussion when it talks about a well-regulated militia. However, the Michigan Constitution has an explicit black and white guarantee of your right to bear arms for self-defense. Simple as that. You have the right under our Constitution. I'm looking forward to bringing that bill to a vote in the House in the fall session. I'm going to push on it hard. I know I'm not going to get the support of certain local newspapers, but nevertheless, I think it's the right thing to do, and it's long, long, long overdue. One other bill that came through local government committee, which I proudly voted for, and the speakers were very helpful in getting this teed up, and that is a bill to put an end to these so-called sanctuary cities. Good. This is pure nonsense. We fought a civil war over uniform laws across the United States, and yet we now have the liberals saying, but there's exceptions, and we're not going to follow the law if we think we are more morally superior than the federal government. The bill we passed out of the House Local Government Committee will say, much like my gun bill will say, if you intentionally violate federal law and prohibit your local police officers and others to enforce the law, then you will be sanctioned individually, and your city will have that ordinance overturned. So it's the same concept, but it's a crucial issue. We shouldn't have to fight these fights. We should not have to have yet another law to guarantee the constitutional rights we already have. We shouldn't have to have another law that simply says follow federal immigration law. But anyway, we're proceeding on both of those fronts. They're both extremely controversial. I can tell you in my brief tenure in the House, the hearing on the sanctuary cities was the wildest and woolliest I've ever been in. It was almost out of control. Lots of swearing and carrying on and threats. It was incredibly undemocratic with a small d. A lot of these folks do not respect the right of other people to speak and hold opinions. They seem determined to outshout us. But we didn't get outshouted, and we voted it out of committee on a party line vote. And all the Republicans voted for my gun bill. All the Republicans voted for that ban on sanctuary cities. So it's important to keep the conservatives down there. We could use a few more to give us a hand anywhere in these other districts. So those are issues that are right now on the boards that I am personally dealing with. Did you want me to do questions and answers or not?
I'm gonna have a couple.
All right, a couple of them. I'll leave it. Do you want to recognize one?
Gary, what was the bill number for the sanctuary cities?
I gotta look at my note here.
That is 4105, I believe.
Yeah, there are two bills. 4105, sponsored by Representative Hornberger from Macomb County, next door, and 4334 by Representative LaFave from the Upper Peninsula.
Thank you a lot for that. Anybody got a question for Gary?
Gary, regarding
Yes.
the speakers mentioned about the workforce development, vocational skills, one of the, Congressman Mitchell's been around the district, heard well and clear the need for reform in that area.
Yes.
One of the areas that keeps coming up is certification of these instructors needed to put them in the schools. Lapeer's got vocation, every county's got them. How difficult do you think that will be to get through to change the certification requirements that are out there to allow these professionals to come into public schools and others to teach what needs to be taught?
Right. That's an extremely important point, and vocational ed is very close to my heart. I was president of the ISD school board here for about 20 years. We run the vocational program, so this is something I care deeply about. We have a 4-bill package that has passed the House by a wide margin that our speaker helped us with, that makes several efforts to change the curriculum to make it more friendly toward vocational programs, which is one of the reasons we have trouble getting young people into vocation, because some of the curriculum requirements are so, frankly, irrelevant to what that student is trying to do that makes it hard. As far as certification goes, we're already in relatively good shape on vocational teachers, because there is a provision in the law that a person can be hired by the vocational program now based on their work experience, that they can demonstrate competence, and they are willing to go ahead and acquire a bachelor's degree over a period of years. So we've got an opportunity there. What we don't have is in the general education curriculum, which I think needs to be reformed badly. We have a lot, in my opinion, nonsensical, irrational requirements of teachers taking extra credits, whether or not they're relevant to their field or not. Having all these certifications and boots, when you've got people, presumably, you know, I assume Tom's a fellow attorney. He probably doesn't have a teacher's certificate, as I do not have. And yet he and I could not go into the public school and teach a 1-hour political science government course, even though we might know something about it. You'd have to be a fully certified teacher out of our liberal institutions. Whether or not you could demonstrate depth of knowledge, you could demonstrate, well, I got X credits, and anyway. That's a real problem, but it's a broader problem than voc ed. Okay.
One more question. Anybody got one more question for Gary? Yes, ma'am.
My question is, and neither one of you have talked about yet, I am concerned about MDEQ and Pipeline 5. I was at the meeting in Polk where the Pipeline Task Force presented their report. And my understanding of most of what their report was they took all their information from Enbridge, the people that own the pipeline, rather than really doing their own study. They did not even do their own visual study. You can go online and see a 3-minute tour of the pipeline where there's long strands, sections that aren't being was a guy from U of M who said that their study of a simulated what would happen wasn't even properly done, that he has done it. And he says, because it's changing currents like every 3 to 6 hours, you need to be doing that study every 3 to 6 hours over a week or so. And they just did it here, there, willy-nilly, from what I understood and he understood, that they didn't even do that right. I mean, how can they give a proper report when all their basic information comes from the company that owns the pipeline? And their biggest concern was an anchor might grab it. Well, that's not gonna happen right now. I mean, it never has. So they don't see that as a threat. They talked about different routes they could do. It cost us nothing but 2 cents for them to shut that pipeline down in Michigan. It'll cost all of us 2 cents, they said. Most of that oil doesn't even stay in Michigan. It goes other places. What are we getting out of that? What is the government of Michigan getting out of it that people are not getting out of it? That they're threatening the largest freshwater reservoir in the world. And
under dam, do they want to sue
Oh,
US government over?
So what's your question, Gary?
You're doing a long speech,
why
I'm not
are
sure I
we
got the question.
trusting? I guess the question is, why are we trusting MDEQ again after the Flint water fiasco? And I wondered if even any of these men lived in Michigan.
So you're wondering why we're questioning the MTA or MPQ again?
Why are we dragging our butts to do
Yeah,
something
why are
about
we,
this?
yeah, why are we
Okay,
bringing
let
up, yeah.
Gary see if he can answer that. I don't know if I can.
You've given a long statement, some of which I might agree with, some of which I may not agree with, a lot of which I don't know whether it's accurate or not.
Well, you need to go to that report and look up their report.
Okay,
I've
let's
got,
answer.
I've got the report. I'm not necessarily impressed with U of M professor just tells me he disagrees. I want the facts, and I want them carefully laid out. But here's consideration you need to think about. I've looked at that pipeline personally. The steel is this thick on that pipeline. You're not talking about something that's going to rupture immediately. You're talking about something we've got to analyze carefully, make sure from a scientific and an engineering standpoint that we're doing the right thing for the state of Michigan. If I believe that is a danger to our lakes, I would vote to shut it down tomorrow. But I've got to be convinced that that is accurate. You need to look at all the aspects of one of these things. If we shut down the pipeline, okay, fine, shut it down. We've still got to transport that oil and gas in some way. So
They
how does
talked
it get
about that.
how does it get transported? By truck.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you did it by truck, we can do it. It would run a gas truck over the Mackinac Bridge every 20 minutes ad infinitum forever to transport the same amount of material.
Yeah.
The potential for safety problems with trucks of that magnitude up and down our expressways forever has got to be weighed. You don't just say, oh, let's bring all the trucks at us, or we can ship it over the lakes and ship. But is that a foolproof thing either? I mean, you've got to weigh the costs and the benefits.
Right.
Make sure you're doing the right thing for the people and the right thing for the environment. But I'm chair of Natural Resources Committee, so I'm deeply involved and concerned about that issue. I can assure I'm going to look into it very carefully, and I'm going to take a well-balanced look before I vote to do anything on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary.
Last comment, I'd rather hear all my fellow legislators talk, but I had made a commitment to be at a meeting starting at 8, so I've got to slip out. But I'm the local guy, so I'll be back to your meetings as often as I can.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, next we're going to listen to a representative from Senator Greens' office. Jim McCluskey.
Thank you, Tim.
See.
I'm going to start out tonight with a question. We need a little bit of audience participation. This is part hypothetical, part reality. If there was a state-run psychiatric hospital located a little bit to the north of here, been around for about 100 years, had 150 beds, employed about 350 people. If our governor proposed in his budget that a new Caro Center would be built, but he did not specify where this hospital would be built, And if this proposal was reviewed and re-reviewed many, many times by lots of people with various departments in Lansing, how many of you would think that those bureaucrats or deputy directors would do such a good job researching this proposal that they would get everything 100% exactly right on what to do with this hospital?
Yep.
We have any people who would say 100% guarantee? You are correct. We found out through Mike and a few of our other elected officials that some of the information that the people in Lansing, primarily with the different departments, I think the Department of Health and Human Services, they actually had some inaccurate information, and originally we got the impression that they were going to be taking this hospital, moving it up north, supposedly somewhere north of Clare. But thanks to some good due diligence, thanks to phone calls, letters, some of you probably did some of that communication together. We learned just recently that the Caro Center will remain in Caro. They are going to be adding about 50 beds. We're not sure of the exact timetable, but with the new fiscal year beginning in October, probably some of that planning process will take place. I think most of us here tonight are old enough to remember what happened with Lapeer State Hospital. For a while, it looked like history was going to repeat itself up in Caro, but at least, hopefully for the next 100 years, that facility is going to be a very fine facility and create some good jobs at the same time. Mike is also working on another, what we call a major economic development project. Again, regional in nature, should have a good positive impact on Lapeer County. We still have a few I's to dot and T's to cross, but hopefully, when the time is right, our news media will be publicizing that quite a bit. A follow-up to what Representative Howell was talking about, sometimes we always talk about the need for small government or lesser government, and there is a bill that probably Speaker Leonard knows backward and forward, 4205. We call it the no greater than the feds legislation. Quite often we question why certain things at the federal level say this, certain things at the state level do not say the exactly same thing. Instead of reading you all 5 pages of House Bill 4205, I'm going to read you the key part of it. It says, except for emergency rule, if the federal government has mandated that the state promulgate rules, an agency shall not adopt or promulgate a rule more stringent than the applicable federally mandated standard unless the director of that agency, such as DEQ, DNR, you name it, determines that there is a clear and convincing need to exceed the applicable federal standard. So remember that 4205, Representative Tristan Cole, I think, is the main sponsor of that bill. Last couple items, Mike and I had a chance to attend the annual conference for Michigan Right to Life a couple weeks ago. I had some very powerful speakers. At that time, there were actually 14 pro-life pieces of legislation that were either in committee or about to be sent out of committee. Just to give you a brief idea, abortion provider funding ban, heartbeat miscarriage awareness act, abortion pill reversal protocol, clinic licensing enforcement act, citizens accountability act, prenatally diagnosed conditions, dismemberment abortion ban. One of the others we talked about was the Choose Life license plate, one that was vetoed by the governor a couple of years ago. As you may have heard, he did the same thing again. I think it was last week. I think one of his comments was that him approving this license plate would be too divisive for Michigan. And he does not think that we need to do something divisive. According to Right to Life, this will probably be coming back again, maybe with a different governor, and knock on wood, it will be approved that time. Last item, I probably would have never said this a couple years ago, but we could potentially be within striking distance of overturning Roe versus Wade. I attended a meeting just last night, kind of a regional Right to Life meeting, and I was a little surprised, but we actually have legislation here in Michigan that makes abortion on demand illegal. I think that was can guess what year that legislation was approved?
I don't want to, I'd be wrong.
I believe it was 1864, don't quote me on that exact year. So we are being told that when that vote at the Supreme Court takes place, we will actually go back to that state law that we had that makes abortion on demand in Michigan illegal. But we will probably see every pro-abortion group nationwide all of a sudden scouring every corner of Michigan, spending money from New York, California, you name it, trying to basically, squash what we did many, many years ago. So this is certainly something that I hope all of us can pray for. Nobody knows for sure, when one of our current pro-abortion justices will step down. We were told that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was gonna, wait until Mrs. Clinton got elected, but apparently that strategy did not work out too well for her. So we will just try to remain as positive as we can. So that's all I've got for tonight, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Bill. You got a question?
Oh, no,
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering when the Freedom of Information Act would be adopted by the Michigan legislature. Ours and Massachusetts are the only two in the nation that do not have to deal with it.
I believe there was some legislation.
I spoke with Gary.
Introduced not too long ago. It did, and was sent over to the Senate. It looks like it might be that far away. Sometimes, we don't get exactly the same results in the Senate as we do the House, but I will take this back to Mike and his office staff, and if you would like to call the office as well. But my guess is that will probably be on the agenda not too far down the road.
Okay, Roger, go ahead.
Real quick, anything
Sure.
on Mike's,
I wish I could tell you that the president is going to call tomorrow morning at 11:52 a.m. and Mike is going to take that call and he'll say, if you guys want me, I'm yours. But nobody seems to know for sure. It's almost like he's got a dartboard. He's going to throw the dart, and whatever date might show up, maybe that's one. But for those of you who've not heard, we still believe that Mike is the top candidate for Michigan Director, USDA Rural Development, and sometimes those appointments go very quickly. Sometimes they, go closer to molasses. So,
Oh, good for him.
yeah, we'll keep you posted.
Thank you. The next speaker, I want to introduce, used to be representative for our district, else. And folks, I want to reintroduce this meeting, Kevin Daley.
I didn't really expect to be getting up here in the front and being given 5 to 10 minutes to speak, so I won't take that much time because it's getting late. But I just called Tim yesterday, and I thought it was about time I came to this group and made an official announcement. Probably most of you already know, but as was mentioned just a minute ago, that when the rumors started coming out that Mike Green was going to be getting an appointment at the federal level, my wife and I had a good discussion, and we decided if I was going to run again, it might be time that I make that decision and get my name out there now. So I am officially in the race. I am the only signed up candidate that's officially registered to run in 18. And we've got a unique situation here in Lapeer County. We currently are represented with a congressman in Washington, D.C. from Lapeer County, Paul Mitchell, doing a great job for us. We got Representative Lapeer County, which we've been fortunate enough to have for the last, 14 years, 16 years, from Lapeer County. So we could possibly have the chance, if I'm successful, to have a senator from Lapeer County too. So I think that's a good thing for our county. It could be a good thing all the way around. But, I think most everybody here, I'm not going to get into a lot of political issues tonight because I'm sure as we go forward and others will get into this race, I'm sure there's going to be meetings where we'll have discussions about that when we actually have a race too. But as of this time, I'm not running until 18. We've got lots of time, but I'll tell you that for those of you that know how I campaign, I'm working hard in Tuscola and Bay County now, and I'm still attending the meetings down here. In fact, there was a big debate tonight whether to go to a township meeting in Tuscola County, or Bella Township, I think, or come to this meeting, and I decided, I really should come to a local meeting and make this announcement here. So tomorrow night, I'll be at another township meeting in Tuscola County, and every event we can get to. So I just am asking you to consider your support, and I appreciate having the chance to do this. Thank you.
Anybody got a question for Gary? Excuse me.
Kevin.
I've only known him for 20 years. Kevin. Okay, thank you, Kevin. That's a pleasure. And the last representative we want to talk to, but not the last one in importance, okay, is Representative Gary Glenn. I'd like to for those of you who don't know Gary, he's representative of the 98th district, is that right? And we're very pleased to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. My privilege to be here again. I think this is the third time I've spoken to the Lapeer Tea Party. I was one of your speakers at the big rally at the courthouse back in 2010, if I remember correctly. 2009. And I was the speaker at the very first rally we had for the Midland Bay County Tea Party back in 2009 as well. And in fact, in 2011, 2012, felt compelled to try to actually run for the United States Senate and went through a process whereby I won the endorsement of, I believe, 45 of the 65 or so active Tea Parties that were in our state of Michigan at that point. So it was overwhelmingly the selection of your fellow Tea Partiers. I stand here before you tonight as a fellow Tea Party. Party Anybody who knows me knows I'm a person of faith, and I say it with all sincere conviction, thank God for the Tea Party. Because I think the Tea Party held us back from the brink of socialism in the years of Obama to at least have us given a chance to take our country back when Hillary Clinton was defeated and Donald Trump was elected. So I give you greetings on behalf of We the People of Mid-Michigan, which meets in Auburn, my hometown Tea Party there in Bay County. In my 20s, I led the campaign in the state of Idaho that made Idaho the nation's 21st right-to-work state. And then I was a founding board member in 2011 of the Michigan Freedom to Work Coalition, which launched the successful Miracle in Michigan of making Michigan a right-to-work state of all places. When I was a county commissioner, I authored the first medical savings account healthcare plan in America for county employees. Testified before Congress. They called me a free market pioneer in healthcare reform back in the mid-1990s. Everybody's got a medical savings account or health savings account now, but at the time it was very controversial. I was helping lead the charge nationally. I've served 19 years as president of the American Family Association of Michigan, pro-life organization. I'm board of 2 other pro-life organizations, and along with a Catholic law professor, a co-author of the Marriage Protection Amendment that Michigan voters overwhelmingly approved now some 13 years ago on the ballot to say that marriage is only between a man and a woman, which I believe it will and should remain. I was elected in 2014 to represent the people of Bay and Midland counties. I got reelected with 60% of the vote last November, won 48 out of 50 precincts, and lost the final 2 by a combined total of 6 votes. So I had broad support there at home, and my colleagues trusted me enough in the Republican caucus to elect me Associate Speaker of the House pro tem. So certainly privileged to serve with Speaker of the House Tom Leonard, Representative Gary Howell, who's not here anymore. And by the way, how many of you are convention delegates to the state convention? Anybody? Republican State Convention? When it comes time to think about next August of 2018, who we want to nominate to replace Bill Schuette as our next Attorney General, I hope you will keep Speaker Tom Leonard in mind. Okay? He did not just make an announcement. I just told you what I hope to Now, the Speaker was good enough to appoint me as Chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee. I have led the fight in our legislature to restore free market principles to our energy sector. I believe monopolies lead to poorer service and higher prices. In the 2000 to 2008 time frame, everybody in Michigan was free to choose where they buy their electricity. that competition and consumer choice resulted in us having electricity rates lower than the national average at 4th highest in the Midwest. Under Granholm, 90% of the market was remonopolized. We now have the 12th highest electricity rates in the nation and the highest in the Midwest. I believe, after 2 years as vice chairman of that committee and now 6 months as chairman of that committee, that is the largest remaining impediment to Michigan becoming the job-creating force that we ought to aspire to be. I don't think we ought to be satisfied with being number 2. I think we ought to be the Texas of the North and get to the point where Texas starts talking about we're the Michigan of the South. And that, I think, is the single biggest thing we could do, is restore competition to our energy market and bring down the cost of electricity. I'm a primary sponsor of the legislation that passed the House recently to restore our Second Amendment right to carry a concealed pistol without having to pay the government and get a permit, their permission, to exercise our Second Amendment rights. My oldest son, by the way, is named Heston. If that gives you a clue about where I stand on that issue. But at a time when we face growing civil unrest and even the encouragement of violence in our streets, and terrorism, both foreign and domestic, I believe the more law-abiding American everyday citizens who are free to carry a weapon to protect themselves, their families, their property, and their businesses, the better. So I hope you'll support that legislation through your state senator. I'm the sponsor of a bill to repeal and replace Common Core. I don't need to explain that issue to you. Our educational decisions ought to be made at the local school board, local principals, local parents, get the federal government out of it. And on the principle that if you're in a hole, you ought to at least quit digging. I am happy to be the primary co-sponsor, along with Gary Howell, the two of us, the two sponsors, of legislation as of the end of this fiscal year to no longer allow any further enrollment in the Medicaid expansion criteria. We cannot sustain it the way it is now. It makes no sense. It's an abuse of your tax dollars if we continue to allow enrollment in a program we can't sustain even now. And if you've been reading the papers about what they're talking about in Washington, they're talking about reducing that promise that Congress made some 5 years ago to get Michigan to pass this Medicaid expansion. So on the principle, we ought to at least stop digging. And I heartily endorse what Gary Howell said about stopping these sanctuary cities. I actually, if you remember the shootings and the slashings in Paris, you may recall that Governor Snyder had said he wanted Michigan to be the #1 location of Syrian immigrants in the country. And when that happened over in Paris, and they said it was a Syrian migrant who was the guilty party, I wrote a letter, an email to Governor Snyder that afternoon. I said, Governor, you ought to put this thing on pause. You ought to retract that thing about you want Michigan to be #1 in the nation for attracting Syrians. And in fact, that afternoon, he did reverse himself, at least temporarily, and some 30 other governors, Republican and Democrat, went along with him. I mean, sometimes the Lord puts you in a position and a lever in history where you can have an impact far beyond what you might think a state legislator might have. But I was certainly proud to have carried just the simple principle that we ought to be able to be secure and safe in our American cities, in our neighborhoods and our streets here in Michigan. Now, Tom made reference, and so, I mean, you guys need to get to know me, and I wanted to reacquaint myself with you. But I did go through an experience this past year. January 15th of 2016, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Prostate cancer. Guys, my PSA score was 348. Not 3.48, 348. That's pretty bad when 4 is a danger level. It had climbed up my spinal column and destroyed the L5 vertebrae. Didn't even know I had a broken back. I was playing basketball, hauling firewood, pushing cars out of snow with a broken back. L5 vertebrae gone. 1 week later, the PSA score was 100. My doctor said that was a near miracle. As soon as I found out about this, I went public with it because I knew my church would pray for me, but But I figured there'd be thousands of people who'd pray more for me if they knew about it. I put it on the front page. Get cancer, that's front page news. Up in the Midland and Bay Area media. That backbone was eaten out. Hurt a lot, like 8 on a scale of 10. But 1 week later, the PSA score was 100. 4 weeks after that, it was 1.1. Now, my personal doctor said it was a near miracle when it went to 100. 4 weeks later, it's 1.1. It's never been above that since. Last time it was tested, it was less than 0.01. The neurosurgeon said they'd have to put a titanium cage in my backbone to replace that vertebrae, and my wife was looking forward to being able to tell good folks like you that if you thought Gary had a backbone before, now it's titanium reinforced. We looked at the x-rays and had a black hole. All those shiny white vertebrae, black hole. We watched it over the next 4 months grow back out of nothing, which the doctors say doesn't happen. Twice, when I was diagnosed, 5 weeks later, when I was in remission, front page, top of the page, I said my ultimate hope was in the healing power of Jesus Christ. And so if I figured I was going out preaching. I have always felt a sense of duty to maximize my impact. I don't think the Lord calls you to work for which He doesn't equip you. And so I've always wanted to maximize my impact wherever I may be in a position to do so. I will admit to you now having some sense of urgency. But the University of Michigan Cancer Center told me a month ago they considered my remission stable, told me I don't need to come back for a year. So praise the Lord. I'll close with this. You want to know what makes Gary Glenn tick? I was raised by a World War II Marine who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. He taught me to love my country. Simple as that. I took an oath when I joined the Boy Scouts and said, on honor, I'll do my best to do my duty to God and my country. And about 15, 20 years later, took another oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Served 8 years in the Army National Guard and the Army Reserves. I have an overdeveloped sense of duty. One evidence of that is the fact that even when I was going through 5 months of chemo, after the remission, they wanted me to do chemo, which was worse than cancer. I never missed a vote, I never missed a caucus, and I never missed a committee meeting in Lansing. My wife and I marvel that that's the case, but I never did. I have an overdeveloped sense of duty to do whatever I can, wherever I am, to ensure that my children and my 6 grandchildren inherit from me what I inherited from my father and those who came before him, a free country. I know you feel that same sense of duty. That's why you were here in 2009 and 10. That's why you're here tonight. I look forward to standing alongside you in that commitment and sense of duty. And I would simply say in closing, God bless you and keep you strong for that fight. Great to see you again. Thank
you. Well, now I'm going to talk for a few minutes. That's hard to follow, so I'm not a speaker at all.